Start.
A very good evening from the State of Affairs podcast. Uh, I'm back with this very, very important issue that's at the center of global geopolitical discussions and has been the hotspot of current geopolitical things that most of the people talk about. And we just come across news and all the flashing things from Europe also because there is a war that's going on between Russia and Ukraine. So the important topic that has been sent down by all the colleagues and all the friends that we need to talk about is the Europe's energy security and things around it. So I thought that there is no better person I can just tap for this session. So I got a very important guest for this evening. So first of all, I'd like to introduce her. She is Dr. Swasti Rao. She actually works with Manohar Parikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis as a research associate, and also is known for her program at the print. And I have been just following closely her conversations and her analysis of the European geopolitics. So first of all, I'd like to welcome her. A very warm welcome from the State of Affairs, Dr. Swasti.
Thank you, Mehraj. It's a pleasure joining you. Yeah.
First of all, I'd like briefly to just rush down to this thing that why didn't Europe think before this war that it has diversified its energy security, energy crisis, given the fact that it is entirely covering 10.53 million square kilometers, having a political geography like this, a very large economy as a unit, and also its technological heft, its foreign relations, its market heft, also its welfare measures, and it has inherited a wealth and a grandeur. Still, why hasn't this thing come up with the policy analysts and its foreign policy experts to think over it before they actually got into the Russian energy security thing?
Right. You see, Miraj, one of the things that we need to understand about the war, which has obviously started now and has been going on for so many months, and obviously the first commonsensical question that would come to anybody's mind is that if you were so vulnerable and so dependent on Russian energy, why did it not strike you that it would be somewhere your Achilles heel? This perhaps could be your undoing, right? That is the commonsensical approach or the commonsensical learning that we now seem to have in retrospect. The question that you asked, and that probably baffles everyone else, is that why did not the European leaders think of it? Why did not Germany think of it? Why did not France think of it? Why were these countries living in a way of a daydreaming, so to say, state of mind, while getting themselves completely dependent on Russian energy, and at the same time not really perhaps doing enough, so at least it seems, to sort of tackle these flashpoints. Now, you see, one of the things that we need to understand when we are talking about Europe is that if you look at, say, for example, the economic powerhouse like Germany or etc., the Second World War economic order that Europe inherited, right? I mean, let's go back a little bit. I think it'll be helpful for everyone. What was the security and economic order that was established after the Second World War? Which was that basically the NATO was established. And what is NATO? Of course, I'm sure you know that NATO is North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is led by the US and which basically caters for the security, of basically the European countries, and especially Western European countries at that time, because they were a part of that alliance. So, long story short, the security and economic order that the European continent, kind of inherited after the Second World War, and especially the Western Europe, part of it, was that while NATO is going to look after our security challenges, we are going to be using our resources, the money that we got from the Marshall Plan, etc., in 1948, all the money that was pumped into Germany and everything, the Bretton Woods system at that time, which of course was changed after 1970s. But I just want to sort of, brush up everybody's memories and tell them that the security and economic architecture that we had that Europe had inherited after the Second World War was such that they did not really have to spend on their security, and all the money that they were that they were having was basically to improve their economy. And after 90s, after 1991, especially the collapse of Soviet Union, when NATO also expanded and European community became more integrated as European Union, after in the 1990s particularly, okay, then it was something that was taken for granted that there exists from Soviet times a huge network of pipelines running from Soviet Union directly into Europe. Okay, now you will ask me, why is the pipeline system, so convenient, or why did Europe become so dependent on it? Why did the big economies, especially economies like Germany, Italy, etc., or France, for instance, France did not become as dependent? We'll discuss it. But why did they become so dependent on it? You see, so connecting the two dots, was it that, for them, the modernization, the economic progress, okay, if you look at Europe, was actually based on this cheap energy supplies from Russia through the network of pipelines, because it was the most efficient way of getting natural gas. You see, how is natural gas exported from one point to point A to point B? The easiest way to export that natural gas is exporting it or sending it in its natural form through pipelines. So you do not need anything like regasification facilities or having liquefied natural gas terminals, etc., because that is a different level of infrastructure. Basically, what Europeans did was that because they wanted to ensure the delivery of natural gas, cheap natural gas in its natural form via the existing network of gas pipelines, and they had a entirely different universe of politics also, because most of these pipelines were either coming via Ukraine, okay, and that is why Russia wanted to make, I mean, we'll take it up later, but Russia wanted to, basically they have a Nord Stream 1 and a Nord Stream 2. So why did they need a Nord Stream 2 when they already had existing pipelines like the Ural pipeline? There's so many of them, okay. There's a Brotherhood pipeline. There are lots of them. I'll give you names of them, in a while. So basically, the point is that Russia and all these pipelines that were passing through these, respective countries, for mostly through Ukraine, they were also paying a lot of money, like hefty transit fee, okay, to Ukraine for that passing. And for Ukraine, this particular transit fee was almost 3% of their GDP. So you can understand that the money was huge. So because of this existing network of pipelines, Europe was on the way of its economic planning. They had totally taken that into account, that they will be getting this natural gas from Russia in its cheapest form, because the other way to get it is through LNG terminals, of course. And there are certain countries, particularly the coastal, countries, the countries that have coastlines in Europe, like France, etc., who have actually, in time, they had invested in a sufficient number of LNG terminals also. And therefore, when this particular war came, they were not as affected by Russia's weaponization of, cutting down gas supplies, etc. But look at the landlocked countries in Europe. The landlocked countries were at the receiving end of this weaponization, because they did not have the coastlines, and they had completely relied on the natural gas reaching them in its most efficient, cheapest manner. And nobody thought that because natural gas and oil, and especially gas, because 40% of Europe's natural gas was coming from Russia, and it was such an important, source of revenue for Vladimir Putin, that he would actually throw all of that out of the window and really launch this war. Until about January, till the last time that NATO and Russia met, for their annual meetings, the rhetoric from the Russian side was that there is going to be no military, so to say, operation, or no military, option basically for Ukraine. And then just in a few weeks, we saw that all of that was just an illusion, and the war started. So to your question, which is that why did they not diversify in time? So one of the reasons why they did not diversify in time, I'm just concluding what I said, A was because there was already existing a huge network of gas pipelines from the Soviet times. These pipelines were getting serviced from time to time, shut down for maintenance and then opened up again. So that was something that was happening for years. A. B, Europe had really taken this into, in a way, they had really taken this for granted because it was a very efficient system. It was working very well. And all the Schroeder years and the Angela Merkel years, this was particular something that really got Russia close to the European economic system. And everything seemed to sort of work fine because nobody really thought that Putin would be launching a war, which doesn't really make any kind of sense. Okay. But not realizing that what they are doing in the process is that they are really making themselves very dependent and extremely vulnerable. And lo and behold, then it started happening. 2014. Of course, you can say 2014, should have come as a flashpoint. In fact, even before that, 2008 should have also come as a flashpoint because 2008 was the first European war after the end of the Cold War, which is when Putin had single-handedly annexed parts of Georgia, which is a neighboring country. And 2008, a lot of things could have happened in 2008, but because of Merkel and all those, leaders which were very pro-Russia at that time, and not pro-Russia because of anything else, because of their dependence, economic dependence. Okay, so they kept trying to negotiate, and different kinds of solutions kept coming up. But now, what it teaches us that nothing made sense and nothing had any lasting impact. And Putin went ahead and did something which was, until it happened, it was considered impossible. I don't remember how many Europeans I have interacted with who, before the war started, said that, oh, Putin is not going to do this war. This is so completely irrational. What is he going to get out of it any which way? And why would he lose on the billions of euros of, the money that he earns via the natural gas trade? So it did not make sense. And I think that this was a miscalculation, a misjudgment on the part of the European countries.
There is a catch. There is a catch for researchers like us. I mean, if we can see that Vladimir Putin is a smart guy, very, very smart guy, knowing the way that there is a chasm existing in the European Union states, there are fissures that he can flirt with. And despite that, Russia invaded, parts of the Georgia in 2008, in 2014, it annexed Crimea. In 2020, this year, it had, an outright invasion with Ukraine, and the entire system was just came to a collapse. So I'm just yet to understand the fact that what actually prevented and prohibited the entire European Union think tanks and the policymakers to actually get through this thing, that if he is flirting with the fault lines of the geopolitical realities of Europe, why still they just denied it? Is it that Russia was knowing it, that it can just play out with the European Union fissures and the chasm that's existing, or there is something external to it?
Well, that's a very good question, Mehraj, because you see, let's look at it this way. Now, on the one hand, we are just taking it, for example, we are taking it as a clearly established variable that Putin is a master strategist and he knows the strategy very well. And actually, that is something that has actually shown, he's shown also that to the world, in the sense that, remember the times when he had come and he had taken the reins of Russia. And if you remember, that was the time when the first Chechen uprising in the 90s, okay, when Soviet Union had just collapsed and Russia was very weak. And then lots of these arrangements were made with NATO, and then a lot of people say that was the time when NATO expanded, etc. So there is a man who comes when Russia is very weak, and the first Chechen war is already uncontrolled by then. But the second Chechen uprising, he kind of really crushes with a lot of resolve. And it is around that time that, the late 1990s and early 2000s, especially 2002, when he comes up as this really strong leader that can give Russia its dignity, that, according to a lot of Russian people and a lot of narratives in Russia, that it lost because of the way Soviet Union disintegrated. So far, so good. And then in 2008 when he went ahead and annexed parts of Georgia. Well, you're right. I mean, on the one hand, I don't think that Europeans were happy about it. One of the reasons why he could just get away with it was because Georgia knew its reality and nobody fought. So that particular war ended in I think merely 5 or 7 days at the max, and nobody put up a resistance. And by the time somebody was realizing what is happening, Putin had already annexed it. So all that happened was that the European community and the international community said that they are not going to recognize the so-called independent provinces of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, in Georgia, and just business continued as usual. On one of the things that I will say that Europe has done is that, see, even though you are talking about natural gas, but let's understand that natural gas and these kind of sources are non-renewable. Okay, so there has been a lot of debate and discussion and planning within Europe to actually go for renewable sources, and especially the major economies like Germany, etc. If you go into what European Union has been doing and the brainstorming that has been happening, you will see that there is a lot of things that they have done, plans that they have, and about taking the clean technology, the green hydrogen research. So they have been doing it. The problem is wind, etc., solar things. So it's all been there. But the point is that, is it, if you look at the magnitude, is it enough to make Europe to let Europe make the transition that it needs in times of an emergency? And the answer is no. The second thing is that after 2008, if you remember why Europe could not do it. Now, let us look at what is happening globally. If you remember, 2008 is also the first, the financial crisis. The Lehman Brothers had collapsed, and it really sent economic shockwaves across the globe. So now you tell me, from a world that is reeling under economic pressures, and especially that kind of a financial crisis, switching from a very efficient and cheap way of getting gas in its cheapest possible form, and especially if you're looking at industries that have really been where natural gas and natural gas supplies has been accounted for, is not an easy task. Okay, so by the time that Europe came out of that, financial pressure, if you remember this particular, the 2008 financial crisis that started from the Lehman Brothers, etc., and Merrill Lynch in the US. In 2009, by the way, if you remember, let me just tell you, it had already reached Europe, and there was this one country that had to be completely bailed out by the European Union, and that country was Greece. And in fact, that particular, the 2009, 2010, right, the financial crisis in Europe is actually called the Greek financial crisis, because Greece had gone completely, bankrupt, and they had to bail out the entire country and its economy. So what I'm trying to tell you is that when we perhaps today look at what the decade that has gone by, the 2 decades that have gone by, we perhaps are not able to understand the kind of challenges that were there at that time. So in 2008, 2009, and 2010, perhaps the biggest challenge for Europe at that time was to try and come out, wriggle off the problems, and especially the financial problems that they had been at the receiving end for, starting from this 2008 financial crisis and what they had to do with respect to Greece. Now, here comes another important point. So, since you're asking, right, that why is it so that Europe was still sleepwalking, okay, their dependence on Russia? It was just not that. At that time, there was also, in 2009, by the way, that was the first time during the Greek financial crisis when China started to enter the European markets, and especially the infrastructure from the East European countries. From that route, okay, China started to enter. China started to increase its FDI. China started to increase its investments slowly. So the point is that, of course, if you look at Europeans, they were trying to diversify. They were trying to get in more sources of investment. They were trying to, take into fold the coming reality of China becoming an economic superpower, etc. The point is, and now when we look back, is that fine. So the effort towards renewables was on. They were trying to diversify, get more capital, get more direct investment from countries like China that were coming with deep pockets, of course. And also remember, China was also one country that was least affected by the financial crisis of 2008, because China had joined the WTO, much later, joined the WTO in 2001. So it was still pretty much insulated from what was happening in the global economy. So they were doing all of that. Along with this, the challenge of sort of, minimizing the impact of the Greek, crisis in the Eurozone, etc. So they were doing it. Now, the question is that, like you said, did they have the vision to understand that while all of this was happening, they also needed to make timely investments in LNGs? Yes, countries like France, there were other countries that did it. But landlocked countries like Germany, for them, that option wasn't really there. And that is why you will see that particularly the German leadership, whether it was Schroeder, then like the Schroeder years during Merkel, and later, whoever there has been. So their approach has been to have friendly relations with Russia because their economy was so dependent. So you understand, geography is also playing a role there. And nobody thought that the weaponization of gas would happen at this extent. The extent is pretty mind-boggling. So to say that they did not make efforts, that's not true. But whether those efforts were enough to bail them out in terms of a contingency, I don't think so. And I think nobody understands it better today than the Germans themselves. And why do I keep taking Germany's name? Is because you see, if you look at the European economic powerhouse, it's Germany. And whatever shockwaves are felt throughout Europe, okay, Germany has a huge role to play. And that is why I'm, giving Germany's example again and again. The three big economies in Europe are Germany, France, and Italy. Germany and Italy have been really dependent on Russia's gas. France has not really been as much because France has like LNG terminals as well. So that is where, you see the German leadership becoming so to say, accommodative to what Putin wanted. So Georgia has happened, not much followed after Georgia. The real, by the way, for the first time when Ukraine had applied for NATO membership was 2008. And that particular application was blocked by two major countries of Europe. You can take a guess, Germany and France. Okay. So you can understand that in 2008, because of all the ongoing economic tensions with respect to the Greek financial crisis and the bailing out, etc., they were very wary of basically going and poking Russia in its eye, because, of course, I mean, since you're a researcher, you may have heard of John Mearsheimer's theory of why NATO expansion is not right, because it will go and poke the bear in its eye and then the bear will respond, etc. And so, well, that's a military strategy kind of thing. But for the Europeans themselves, because they are at the forefront, US is still very far away. For them, it was more to do with the kind of economic ease that they needed at that time. So they blocked Ukraine's application at that time. And then 2014, lo and behold, Crimea happened. And I guess Crimea was the real shock point because as again, until then, nobody had believed that actually Crimea would happen. Okay, so once Crimea happened, things really started to change, more quickly. Again, somewhere not so much for Europe, because if you remember, around that time, around 2014, 15, 16, and until 19, there were negotiations, the Minsk negotiations, the Normandy format talks, okay, that had started around that time. France and Germany played a very important role in bringing Ukraine and Russia at the same table. So 4 countries at the same table, and lots of, rounds of diplomatic negotiations were happening. Whether it was Emmanuel Macron or his predecessors, everybody seemed to be extremely confident of the role that they played in trying and containing Russia. So even while Trump kept somewhere ridiculing the fact that Germany and these countries have gotten themselves so dependent on Russia that it will only take Putin to switch off or to cut off the gas supplies, and they'll be having a run for of their money. But the point is that if you look at the leadership back then, because of Normandy formats and the way they had been going on, the Minsk 1 and the Minsk 1 failed, Minsk 2 came. So basically the point was that because there was so much diplomacy around that was happening, that they perhaps got a feeling that even in the worst case scenario, a full-fledged war is not what they're looking at. And B, sanctions had already become in place and all that was happening. So I don't think that they sort of ruled out a possibility of minor skirmishes or possibility of minor conflicts here and there. Like, for example, in the eastern region of Donbass, the separatists had been there. The Russian strategy of keeping the regions that are close to Russia, if you have the map in front of you, or if you are familiar with the map of Europe, so whether it is the three Baltic countries up north of Ukraine, whether it's those countries, or whether it's Ukraine, or whether it's down south, countries like Georgia, Moldova, and then in the Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, basically Russia has been having, or the Western Balkans, if you move towards the other side of the Black Sea, Russia has been having the strategy of keeping these regions destabilized, because understand that from the Soviet times itself, in varying proportions, there were ethnic Russians that had been living in these areas, okay, which is pretty understandable, because from you can understand from the Bolshevik Revolution to for example 1991, you can understand the kind of demographic displacement or demographic changes that may have happened. It's a really a long time. So they were living there, and once Soviet Union broke down and collapsed, and all these countries became independent, the point was that Russia kept fanning separatism in the pockets of Russian population. And it's been something that perhaps we don't study as much in India, because I think we are used to looking at India-Russia relations from a completely different lens, from the lens of the Cold War, from the lens of defense cooperation, from the lens of how Russia has stood by India while Pakistan fell into the American lap. So we are still looking at it from that lens, and which is a valid enough lens, because that is what works for us. But if you look at the same problem from the lens of the Europeans, it is a completely different picture. So it's basically around, so nobody was ruling out the minor skirmishes, nobody was ruling out the little conflicts, but like a full-fledged war of this scale and intensity and duration, I don't think the Europeans had this in mind. And that is why they are caught on the wrong foot.
One of the important things that still comes and is directly related to this thing is that how much is it realistic that the commitment that's being met out announced by the European Union member states to cut down 15% of their imports from Russian natural gas by the end of this year, given the way that we are heading towards winter, and given the way the demands for electricity and other things that run on this natural gas in the entire Europe, how challenging will that be, and how realistic is it? Are we heading towards a more turbulent energy crisis in the Europe, or there is something more to it?
Well, yes, all right. So this is also something that needs to be understood in the different layers in which it exists. So in one layer is the whole gamut of diversification efforts that are going on. Okay. And there are quite a number of diversification efforts that are going on. That's one. The second, on a different layer, on the second layer, is where they are trying to conserve energy. All right. So diversification is one layer of understanding this problem. Conserving energy is another layer. So, for example, they are trying lots of things to sort of stoke up their reserves, etc. They're doing other things, I'll tell you. Okay. And the third thing that they're doing is that they are really readying themselves up for a long winter without energy. So it's that mental preparation as well that is going on. Let me just tell you what are these three things that I've been talking about. And then, yeah, I mean, there's one more thing, which is that they are now trying to have a price cap on the price of oil, okay, that the EU has been discussing for a long time. It's been on the table. It's a G7 initiative. But then I'll tell you what the problems are with it for introducing a kind of a cap on the price of oil, because the prices are skyrocketing so fast that they are not able to meet it's not realistic anymore. So first, let me start with the diversification layer, okay, as to what really are the diversification efforts. See, the first diversification which is happening is that they are trying to build new pipelines. Okay, now the new pipelines are happening, but the problem is that these new pipelines cannot be done overnight. The building of these new pipelines cannot be done overnight. So, for example, there is a Norway-Poland gas pipeline which has been resumed, and a lot of others also And obviously, since we're talking about pipelines, we have to keep in mind the fact that they take a long time to get built also. One of the reasons why Europe did not bother to build new pipelines, okay, for a long time was because there was an existing structure that was already there, right? So, for example, that particular thing. I mean, so that's called the Baltic pipeline, okay. Then all of that is happening. What is the other thing that is happening is that they are trying to um, have more LNG terminals. Now, LNG terminals are fine, but it is not just the LNG terminals which matter. I think I've been using the LNG terminals term for a long time now. It is also that what they need to do when they're making the LNG terminals is that they should be making energy terminals that are floating, which means that they are mobile. They can be taken from one place to another as needed. So, for example, Germany has recently signed, I think, a 1 billion deal with a Norwegian company. And by the way, Norway is a key player here because now, since they are trying to diversify from Russia within Europe, most of the gas is now coming from Norway. Okay, so Norway and Denmark also. So they have signed, I think, a 1 billion deal with a Norwegian company, and that'll help reduce their dependence on Russia's gas by, say, a 25%, which is not a joke, which is massive. Similarly, Germany has also entered other deals with about floating LNG terminals with Greece, with Denmark. As far as looking outside of Europe is concerned, recently the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz made a very controversial visit to the Gulf countries, and he had a lot of such similar deals with UAE, particularly the gas companies in UAE. He's also met the Saudi prince, because if you remember, over the murder of the Jamal Khashoggi murder case, he was actually quite isolated by the West. So recently, all the Western, starting from Biden to Macron and now Scholz, they've started to go back to Saudi Arabia. So right now, Saudi Arabia is not really into natural gas so much, but it does have massive reserves of natural gas, and it does plan to become the world's largest exporter of natural gas by the end of 2030. So it's quite close. And keeping that in mind, Olaf Scholz has already made a visit to Saudi Arabia, and they are giving them the kind of, mainstreaming Saudi Arabia in the Western world, because for a long time they were castigated for the human rights abuses. It's still there, and that is why I call the visit a bit controversial. So they're doing that. Obviously, they've had major successes with the deals they struck in UAE. Similarly, they're also looking at Qatar. So they went to Doha also. So those are the things that they're doing outside of Europe. Similarly, they have a deal from the US itself. Okay, so if you put all these things together, it is going to help the German dependence on Russian natural gas by like massively. Now the point is, the factor that we need to keep in mind is the factor of time. Whether all of this will come in time. Now, for that, I'll tell you what other things they're doing. The other thing that, for example, the other country that is really working very hard to diversify is Italy. So Italy is also looking at getting their natural gas from Algeria. Okay, they were getting it from Algeria, but then there were certain tensions that happened, and they were not getting as much gas from Algeria. So they're doing that. And if they start getting the gas back from Algeria, it is going to reduce Italy's dependence on Russia by about a good 32%, which is also great. Similarly, they are also now, European countries are looking at supplies from the Caspian Sea. And because, Caspian Sea has countries like Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan that have really, I think, 3/4 of world's natural gas reserves. So they are looking at that. Obviously, now that is a different politics out there, because those countries, particularly Turkmenistan, is pretty dominated by China. And then obviously Russia also has a role to play. But now the good news for Europe is that because Moscow's general reputation and stature has taken a hit, there's no doubt about it. Okay, and since that has happened, I mean, over the months. The Central Asian countries are also becoming more and more visible in their, so to say, going beyond their dependence on Moscow and China, and they are also eager to diversify. So whether this happens and when this happens is definitely a question mark. I am in no position to tell you whether this is going to happen by this year or whether this is going to happen by next year, because you see the way cost is rising, it might have a bit of an impact on this. But as far as the diversification efforts are concerned, they are doing all of this. Now, the other thing that I said is that it's not just about diversifying to other countries and other regions. That's one. Obviously, they're doing it. They're very aggressively pushing for it. What is the other things? The other things that they're doing is that they're trying to fill up their gas storages. And if you look at what the European Union, especially the EU Commission, has been doing, so they've been giving this formula of trying to fill their gas storages by about 90% is their target. And obviously, this is something that that cannot be done overnight, but they are really trying very hard. So, for example, by until about a couple of months ago, when I was researching on that, it had already reached about 60%. Okay, so filling gas storages. So there is a directive which has been issued to every single European Union member country that they've been asked to fill up their gas storages by 90%, and this could provide a bit of a breather. The other thing that they're doing is that really sort of throwing their Paris goals and the commitments out of the window. A lot of countries like Germany, etc., are also entertaining the option of actually going back and burning coal. Okay. Now, the thing is that now, don't look at it very dramatically. It's not that suddenly all the major industrial outlets in Germany are going to be burning coal. But yeah, they are doing that. And it is really a sorry state of affairs, because all these countries have serious commitments to their Paris goals. And with this, they can definitely not beat the Paris goals. So these are the kind of things which are happening in Europe. And then I also told you about the price cap that they are trying to bring. Now, you see, the problem with the price cap is that see, Ursula von der Leyen has been saying it again and again that because of the skyrocketing prices of oil, etc., what is happening is that the oil companies, the energy companies are making a lot of profit. But the common person's, utility bills have already tripled or quadrupled. So what they're doing is that they're saying that we are going to bring about a price cap. Now, obviously, the problem is that for anything that needs to be passed by the European Union, all 27 countries or all 27 members have to agree to it. And getting members such as Hungary and a lot of Bulgaria, those kind of countries to agree to something like this is extremely complicated, because, they also don't have a choice. See, countries like Hungary, for instance, they are completely landlocked countries. Okay. Now, in no way, like the other countries, they can still have the floating LNG terminals and this and that. They can reach out. But look at the countries like Hungary, that are so dependent on Russian gas. I mean, how do you tell them to just go for the price cap? Because, of course, they all fear the weaponization. And, what if Putin just, cuts the gas supplies in toto? So those kind of things have been happening. Now, having said that, and this is something which I'll say, and I'll, just conclude this particular point. You see, it's not that the European or the European states are not aware of the fact that Putin is very much capable of just shutting down the gas supplies. Because recently I did a presentation somewhere where I did a comparative analysis of how much gas was coming from the Nord Stream, how much gas was coming from the pipelines that were going through Ukraine's transit, how much gas was flowing through Yamal, how much gas was flowing through the Turk Stream, etc. And between, for a long time, right, Putin had been, basically the gas supplies through all these pipelines had been coming down and down and down. Okay. So, for example, Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 never saw the light of the day, of course, and now we know what happened to both the Nord Streams, and they are all now gone. But even before those particular sabotage or accident that led to those leakages, I'm sure we'll discuss that, Nord Stream, which was the main export route of Russian gas to the EU until July 2022, this was, shut down for maintenance for about 10 days from July 11th, I guess. I mean, you can check the dates, but around the, somewhere in the beginning of July. And then for 3 days in August again. And then from the first week of September, it was just shut down indefinitely. So, so basically the fact that you take any this thing pipeline, except for perhaps the Turk stream, which has still been able to manage a steady supply. I mean, with little disturbances here and there. You take the Nord Streams or all the pipelines that were coming through the Ukrainian transit, all of them have been seeing dwindling gas supply. So to say that Europe has not been preparing itself for it is incorrect. So that's what I said. So that is the last point, which is that even psychologically, they know that no matter how much they appease Putin, for the time being, the trend shows that they have to be ready for something extremely drastic. So all of this sort of, connect the dot and you will see that what really is Europe is doing.
One final thing, since we're running out of the time, is that
okay,
what will be the impact of this, even if the sanctions are so positive and they work on the ground against Russia's belligerence and its outright invasion against Ukraine? Number one. Number two, and even if the European Union member states cut down on the Russian natural gas, that's the second case. And even if these two things are combined, what will be the impact of this thing on the global energy markets? Because it will send surely shock waves across the global, energy resources discourse and entire narrative and things. The second thing is that you mentioned it, that German and French exceptionalism within the European Union, what will happen to that? Are they on the same page when it comes to the European Union's official policy of cutting down on Russian natural gas? Or there is something more to it? I mean, I would like you to extrapolate on this thing and then we'll just sign off.
Right, Miraj. So the first thing, right, impact on the global energy market and generally, right? Obviously, I mean, I think it can't really be overstated. The kind of pressure that it has built up, the kind of inflationary pressures it has built up, not just on the global energy markets, but just look at what it has been doing to inflation and all those inflationary statistics you see in Europe, right? For the first time, the Eurozone, the inflation, I think, is probably reaching around 10%. It's never really happened, okay, in a long, long, long time. So the point is that there are a lot of inflationary pressures on Europe. Also understand that this is not something which is coming in a standalone manner. This is followed by the devastating impacts on the global health, global economic health after the COVID-19 pandemic. So also understand that while Europe has a lot of packages to release, for example, the COVID recovery packages, and one of the problems they have with Poland and Hungary is with respect to that. So, like billions of euros have been promised, for that. Billions of euros have been promised into the triangular cooperation all over the world. And now billions of euros have been going into rebuilding of Ukraine. Also, remember, that is also a massive economic pressure. I mean, the world is not really having a great time economically. And by the way, let me also tell you that the supposed cost of rebuilding Ukraine is already being touted at something like €1 trillion. So the point is, where is all that money going to come from? You have to keep the economic cycle running. And with the gas supplies being hit like this, and the general global recession setting in, what really happened. The UK, for example, is no longer in the European Union, but the point is that there is a lot of economic pressure, and whether the world is going to be able to withstand the economic pressure is probably the larger thing in your mind. See, nobody really has a clear-cut answer to that. That is also one of the reasons why these bigger European countries are so desperate to have these free trade agreements with countries like India that have the scale, okay, like the population. Okay, so that is happening. They're very particular. They're very careful of that, and that is also one of the reasons. If you see, is that the European Union is little wary of coming out with a new tranche of sanctions. They will. I think they have already come out with the 8th tranche of sanctions, but again, they are going to be less about creating more, economic pressures on Russia, because somewhere it is also catching them on the wrong foot. So as far as its impact on the global level, of course, that is going to be catastrophic. Okay, there's no doubting that, and we are seeing it here wherever we are sitting, and that is going to happen. Recently, we saw a lot of. As time will pass, we will see lots of new developments with respect to this particular problem. So let us kind of brace up for a very difficult economic period ahead. Okay, that is coming. The second thing that you asked was about the German and the French exceptionalism, right? Yes, as far as the Normandy format talks were being touted by the leadership of these two countries as the solution, okay, to Ukraine's problem, there did exist a kind of a French and German exceptionalism. Adding to that was also this entire development of the AUKUS deal, which had created very visible fissures, okay, between Emmanuel Macron's leadership and UK falling with the US. I mean, if you look at pan Europe, things, and Emmanuel Macron had been saying that NATO is brain dead and we need to be worrying for standing up on our own feet when it comes to even security, and therefore they started coming out with elaborate plans of how to ramp up Europe's security, okay, without relying so much on NATO. But all of that suddenly was forced to be sort of recalibrated when this particular war happened, that nobody, especially in France, okay, and Germany, nobody thought that would happen. If you remember, just few days before the war, where the institute where I work, we had a talk by the German chief of German navies, okay, and Schwenbach, and he was here, and we were discussing the pros and cons and the possibilities of the impending war in Ukraine. And then he said that, oh, he's not going to attack. I mean, somebody from that kind of important post within the German establishment coming and saying, and this was January, and the attack happened in February. So you can totally understand that nobody was prepared for it. There was a US intelligence coming, but it was being rubbished, right? They said that no, a full-fledged attack is not going to happen. So until January, the mainstay was that this is not really going to happen. But then that is why the French and the German exceptionalism went out of the window, and they were forced to become more realist in their understanding. And obviously, as far as I know, a couple of days ago, I was interacting with the chief of the European Security Program at SIPRI in Sweden, and there were 3-4 things that he told me, which I also kind of agree to, and that I'll tell you here. One thing is that things with Russia are never going to be the same again, at least for the foreseeable future. That's one. The second thing is that NATO has become far more strengthened in Europe today, with, of course, countries like Sweden and Finland joining, that had not joined the NATO in the last 150 years. They were pretty neutral in terms of military alliances. So they have joined the NATO. The third thing is that obviously there's going to be more military spending. So we are going to see a more militarized Europe, definitely. The fact of the economic pressures is also forcing Europe. See, they had already realized it. So realization is a different thing. But to actually step up that realization and, just to go full throttle, putting your foot full throttle on the accelerating pedal is a different thing, right? So you might have a realization, you might sit on it, and it's a different thing to go just full throttle. So the economic tensions are also asking or also pressurizing the Europeans, especially those with massive economic interests, okay, to really be very serious about the Indo-Pacific strategy. So that's another fallout of the war that we are seeing. The third thing is that the Europeans have become much more mindful of trying and negotiate the other simmering conflicts. So, for example, recently I did a piece on how it's not just Ukraine, but also, tensions in the Western Balkans and tension in the Caucasus, that the European community, particularly, France and the leaders, they really need to control. And then because they understand they can't really afford another conflict. So those are the kind of things that are happening. What the Europeans, I'll tell you the challenges. Everybody understands that Russia will not be trusted ever again. Putin, at least, will not be trusted. They are going to keep sending Ukraine the required humanitarian and military aid. The challenge is how to remain united, because the sanction fatigue, the economic fatigue is definitely somewhere setting in. So those are the challenges. And let's remember that we are talking about mostly democracies that also have to worry about their internal domestic democratic performance. So whether it's the US, because in November they're going to have by-elections, and he's visibly very anxious, Biden, and that is why he's, the recent setback he got from the OPEC plus countries when they decided to not step up oil production was pretty much seen as an embarrassment for him. So whether it's him there or the Europeans, you saw Macron, the right wing was very close. Okay, I mean they're not really very close, but then they really did perform very well. In Italy, there is a right wing government now, and they are not on the same page when it comes to punishing Russia at the cost of Europe's economic health. So these are tensions. Now, whether or to what extent is Europe going to remain united in tackling the problems of Russia? Common sense, or in an ideal world, yes, if they remain united, they will be able to sail through. The question is, how do you put all the 27 countries on the same page at a time when they probably are going to have they're not going to be able to switch on their heating, in the winters. So those are realistic concerns, and there is no sort of turning away from the very practical, so to say, repercussions of what is going on. So yes, I think if you ask me to just conclude, what I have in mind is that there is an uncertainty, and within that uncertainty are different layers of uncertainties. Okay, but as far as trusting Russia is concerned, well, that is not going to happen.